Our first session today is entitled Tradition, Continuity and Rupture, Perspectives on Tradition within the Pakistan Southasian Context. The speakers will present a variety of perspectives on tradition seeking to define it and place it within a local and global context. Our first speaker today is Dr. Ejaz Akram. He is the Associate Professor of Politics, Religion and Philosophy in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at Lahore School of Management Sciences. His research interests include political philosophy, comparative religion, interfaith dialogue, comparative and normative political philosophy, the environment and sustainability. Dr. Ejaz Akram joined the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at LUMS in August 2005. He holds a PhD in World Politics from the Catholic University of America, Washington, D.C. He also holds 2 MA degrees in Comparative and Regional Studies from the School of International Service at American University in Washington, D.C. and in International Relations from CUA, Washington, D.C. Before joining LUMS, Dr. Akram was at the American University in Cairo. He has also been a part of the Law Faculty of Franklin College, Switzerland. Dr. Akram's research and teaching focuses on Islam and Muslim world, but also the religio-political issues and political philosophies of Judaism, Christianity, and Hinduism. Dr. Akram also engages in academic journalism on television. He hosts his weekly television show, Discourse and Express TV channel, which offers scholarly analysis and discussion on various subjects. His book, Ideas and Realities of Regional Integration in the Muslim World, in the case of the ECO, was published by Oxford University Press. He is currently working on his second book, Spirit and Tradition of Islamic Political Philosophy.
Thank you very much. I start in the name of God, the clement and merciful. It's a pleasure being here in Karachi with all of you to speak about this very important subject that is so often thought about, so often talked about, yet there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding when it comes to the subject of tradition in just about any field of knowledge. Art is one of such fields of knowledge, and I think it has an enormous significance and relevance in the world of art, because art itself is not a meaningless exercise. It's not just a commercial activity. It's something much deeper, whose significance understood through its symbolism is deeply spiritual and meaningful. But before we get to that, the endeavor that we have undertaken in this panel is to try to understand tradition. We use words, we use the concept of tradition, the word tradition, in so many different contexts. In juxtaposition with modernity, it is almost a binary dualism that informs the debate of tradition with something else. So we will have to know what that something else is also. So we may not just define tradition, we also will have to know what tradition is not. And so also know tradition via negativa. So we try to have this dual approach to the study of tradition. But the context in which we use the word tradition, the contemporary users of the word tradition, it has negative as well as positive meanings. The pejorative connotation of tradition is due to modernism and modernity, what we generally understand as modernity. Although modernity is a condition, modernism is a set of ideologies, and modernization is a process. These are 3 distinct terms that I will use in the exposition of what is tradition. But in its negative as well as positive meanings, the pejorative connotation of tradition is due to that modern things and attitudes are somehow better. The assumption is that the modern attitudes and modern things are somehow better, superior, faster than the older order of things. If we say, well, the difference between the modern man and the traditional man. So all sorts of images come to our mind. And tradition is somehow seen as, in this negative connotation, it's seen as oppressive, backward, equated with a backward form of human consciousness, almost infantile, that needs to grow up and transform and make the leap into modernity, become modernity. But it doesn't really happen like that. Even though the binary duality continues to be operational, but the assumption overall is that modernism, modernity is better, technology is better, modern education is somehow better than the older education. We assume that in modern education, people think critically, self-critically, more reflectively, and in the traditional education, it's people are just banging their heads on the table and memorizing by rote without understanding what they're learning. This is an assumption. Similarly, we also assume that the modern statecraft is better than the traditional ways of rule. We think that modern statecraft is about democracy. Democracy is about people's participation, will deliver more justice compared to autocracy and totalitarianism, which is associated with the past. Similarly, we say, well, modern economy is better than the traditional economy because the modern economy is the economy of the scale, it has a connection with technology, and so forth, and it can give us a better life. These are all assumptions, and development and other things that are linked with progress are all at the heart of this notion, the big grand assumption that modern is better. In contrast to this, we see, like I said, the tradition as something rudimentary. If today we want to ask anybody in the upper echelons of the society or even the middle classes and so forth, do you want a modern progressive Pakistan? And what would be the opposite of that? Would be a backward retrogressive Pakistan, which they would somehow inadvertently equate with tradition. These are technically not correct, as my argument will hopefully, inshallah, demonstrate that this is not like that. It is equally important to mention at this juncture that there are positive connotations with the use of the word tradition, which may not be technically correct either, such as in most modern societies, we would say. In Germany, the Oktoberfest is a tradition of the Germans. In America, we would say, well, the State of Union address is somehow something that's done every year. That's the American tradition, the Thanksgiving, the Super Bowl, and so forth. So these are all that we say, well, this is the tradition of the American, tradition of the Europeans, or a small mela in my village will say, well, this is our tradition also. Now, these are things that may have some relationship with what I will expose as tradition, but it's not really tradition itself. These are customs that are confounded with being traditions. So if tradition is not custom, then what is it? If we take a cursory glance at the lexical meanings of the word tradition, it is necessary that we go back into the dictionary meanings of the word tradition and see how they have transformed, and which have led to now this almost reckless usage of this term called tradition. The Dictionary of Etymology, Douglas Harper defines tradition from roots, traces the root of the word tradition, tradition, from 1292 from the word traditio, meaning to deliver or to surrender or handing down of things. This may be one of the meanings of custom, but deliverance is not there in custom as such. The Random House Dictionary defines it as handing down of statements, beliefs, legends, customs from generation to generation, especially by the word of mouth or by practice. Similarly, Collins believes body of customs, things handed down. Now there is this transformation of gradually precipitation of the meaning of tradition into custom, and hence the reckless usage. Now it would be also interesting to look at the word tradition in different world religions before modernity. Religions are nothing but traditions. Modern world is critical of religion at best and disdains it at worst. But throughout the pre-modern era, that we now call traditional era, different religions have understood this word tradition also. In Christianity, a doctrine or a set of doctrines established by Christ himself or the apostles, though not present in scripture. So something that is extra scriptural, but established by Christ himself or the later apostles. In Judaism, it is law of Moses. In Islam, we consider hadith as the traditions of the Prophet. In something that Dr. Koshal will elaborate a lot more later. And in Roman law, by tradition we understand as transferring of movable property. So it has something very procedural, doesn't really have that ladenness of the word tradition. In Hinduism, the Puranas, the old things, that's a tradition. So what we mean tradition in the ordinary parlance, there's something to be, something other than tradition has to be there, contrasted with for definitional reasons. Hence we can say that tradition has come about because of modernity. The word tradition itself has emerged because of modernity. So do we have the exact counterpart of the word tradition in non-modern, non-European languages? I mean, how many people speak English language in our country, which is a medium of communication just now? Less than 5%. So if we have to engage with them on the issue of tradition, what language would we use? We would use their own language. Or, for that matter, anybody who speaks those languages that are classified as non-modern languages. So, in the non-modern languages, we're surprised that there is no word that is the exact counterpart of tradition. In Urdu, which would heavily depend on Persian and Arabic, taqlid is not imitation, is not tradition, it's imitation. Rawayat or something else. It's not really rawayat, it's something, it could be a story, it could be legend, it could be so many things. So we realize that there is no exact counterpart, not only in the Islamic languages, because we are most of the people here are Muslims, in your own tradition, but also it is singularly true of just about every tradition in the world and the traditional language, that there is no word that is the exact counterpart of the English or the European word tradition or tradition. There is no exact word. So the closest words that we find in our own tradition in Arabic is the concept of al-Din, which is at once takes us back to religion, Din al-Ibrahim, the tradition or the religious tradition of Prophet Abraham. In Persian we find Javedan Khirad, the primordial tradition, or in Arabic al-Hikmat al-Khalida. In Hinduism, Santana Dharma. In Chinese, Tao. But these are not the exact counterparts of the word tradition. So, to understand why there is no exact counterpart of the word tradition in non-modern languages, there is a little Sufi parable that tells us that once upon a time there was this baby fish and the mommy fish that were swimming together. And the baby fish asked the mommy fish, "Mommy, mommy, what is this thing called water? Everybody keeps talking about water." And so the mommy fish smiles and tells the baby fish, "If you show me something other than water, then you will know what is water. A medium in the fish cannot survive." So there's something similar. The traditional word dwelled in the Gestalt, in a complete cosmos that was imbued in tradition. And so what was non-tradition was not known to them, which is why it would have to be the Europeans, who producers of modernity, who for the first time sidestepped the tradition to actually see, aha, that is tradition. So you would have to go out of the traditional domain to know what is tradition. Those who dwelled inside the traditional domain, non-tradition was not known to them because that was the only thing that was there. So there were no modernities parallel running to the traditional orders in every culture to which they could refer and say, well, that's modern and this is tradition. So there couldn't have been any other word but the word tradition in the English language. Now, today we live just about every culture, every civilization, every corner of the globe is somehow touched with modern forces. It's not fully transformed, it's massively transformed. But the tradition itself is far from being dead. The tradition, from the traditional point of view, points towards origin of things. That modernity represents a break from the origin, somehow. The non-moderns and the pre-moderns, or the traditionalists, define and see tradition as being connected to the origin. The origin of tradition is the same thing as the origin of man and the origin of nature. The modern world itself takes pride and a mark of distinction from presenting itself as a break from the past. For the modern point of view, the perfection resides at an imaginary moment in time in future. Because there's progress, things are going to become better and better by the day, and there is the theory of evolution, which is behind our minds, which will also locate perfection and imaginary moment in future. So the importance and origin represents for the moderns as embedded in the past, as somehow backward, not representing perfection as such. But for the traditional point of view, the perfection is located in the origin. No Christian will say that he or she is better than Jesus Christ. No Muslim will say that he or she is better than the Prophet Muhammad. No Hindu will say that he is somehow superior from all the chain of avatars and Krishna and all of the Hindu figures and deities and so forth. So, and same thing Confucians for Confucius and Buddhists for Buddha. So the traditional civilizations, they locate perfection in a tangible moment in the past, not in an imaginary moment in the future. So the origin of man is the origin of tradition, which is the same thing as the origin of cosmos, the origin of nature. So what binds the origin of man and origin of nature is a traditional point of view that both man and nature have a common origin in heavens, and their origin is sacred. God created nature, He also created human being from a traditional point of view, and when He created nature, that was His first ayah, that was His first verse, that was the self-disclosure of God, that was His first revelation, was the creation of nature, creation of earth, and the nature in the image of heavens, and put the supreme pontiff of God, the human being who possessed in himself the possibilities of the attributes of God, who was going to be a part of that nature. So somehow the rebellion from that element, that important element, the primordial element, the turning back from the primordialism and sidestepping the nature itself and dwelling in the artificial environment of modern suburbs and so forth, is something that is new. Humanity has never done that before. So, from a modern standpoint, there is no such thing as sacred intrinsically. They are all a social construction, and therefore origin of man and nature is all accidental. And here there is an opposition between modernity and tradition. And on the surface they can be reconciled, but deep down in their epistemologies and their ontologies, they remain diametrically opposite and divergent. Modernism looks at progress as today is better than yesterday, therefore tomorrow will be better than today, and things keep on getting better. And at this point in human history, this myth is about to be shattered, because things have not gotten well progressively. Similarly, evolutionism, which is a theory, but it is taught as a fact in schools. Whether you're watching the Learning Channel, National Geographic, the History Channel, they're all programs produced from the assumptions of evolutionism, and it's a theory which parades as a fact. And so the traditional point of view, from the point of view of traditional religions, from the point of view of traditional man, it is very difficult to jettison his certitude for the sake of a theory. And so this opposition informs this debate, and we have to know the nature of modernism, the nature of modernity and process of modernization, whose intensification is globalization in today's world, to understand what is tradition. And the whole, many people from the traditional school who mostly live in the West, most of the people in the East and the intelligentsia in the East, the cognitive elite of the East are all pro-modern because they want to make progress, make life easy for them and so forth. But we don't realize that this model has failed. The model of modernism has failed because ostensibly it wants to produce a better world. It wants to produce a world that is devoid of tradition and a great leap forward. But that has only happened for less than 5% of humanity and the cost of the planet. The world's environmental degradation today is not because of underdevelopment and lack of modernization, it's because of too much modernization and overdevelopment. And so if the whole world wants to live like the Americans and the Europeans, who would require about 6 or 7 Earths for them to absorb the trash that we leave. It's physically impossible for the entire humanity to live that way. So the model has collapsed and failed. If this model makes a transition towards something sustainable, it will automatically resemble tradition. Tao Te Ching said that by adhering to the Tao of the past, you will master the existence of the present. The crucial message of Taoism is that do not leave the road that has traversed from the past and wander off into new tenure. Stay on that road. Confucius said that I do not create, I will only tell you of the past. God says in the Quran that the whole of the world is permeated by nafs ar-rahman, by the breath of the compassionate. And so this breath of the compassionate, which constitutes the primordial tradition and integrates all of the world traditions with the tradition with a capital T, can never die. In its essential recesses, it is spiritual in nature, and its manifestations are material, cultural, civilization. So, one of the famous traditionalists today, Sayyid Hassan Nasr, defines tradition in his famous book, Knowledge in the Sacred, as following: that tradition can be considered in a more restricted sense, more technical sense, as the application of the principles. The tradition implies truth of a supra-individual character rooted in the nature of reality as such, for it has been said by his own teacher, Fritjof Schuon, that tradition is not a childhood and outmoded mythology, but a science that is terribly real. Schuon was one of the most important expositors of tradition, the concept of tradition in the last century, who said that tradition est la science qui est terriblement réelle. That tradition is a science that is terribly real. You cannot run away from tradition. You can hide, but it will always be there. It is part of human nature. So tradition, like religion, is at once, Nasr continues, is at once truth and presence. It concerns the subject which knows the object which is known. It comes from the sources from which everything originates and to which everything returns. Al-Mabda wal-Ma'ad, and inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. From him we come, and to him we go. The Surah Al-Baqarah, we now think that normally it's customary to say that when somebody dies, but the context in the Quran is very different. It is something that is to be remembered always. It thus embraces all things like the breath of the compassionate, the concept of nafs ar-Rahman, which according to the Sufis is the very root of existence. So tradition is inextricably linked to revelation and religion, to the sacred, to the notion of orthodoxy, authority, to the continuity and regularity of transmission and truth, to the exoteric and to the esoteric, as well as to the spiritual life, sciences, and most of all, arts. So, if the origin of tradition is sacred, it gets this notion from the nature of God himself. One of his 99 names is Al-Quddus, the one who makes things sacred. One who makes things Qudsiya. Sacredness is a property that he bestows upon things that he has fabricated his own image. So definition of tradition is essentially the same as definition of religion in a technical sense, which is that which binds man to God. That which binds man to the primordial origin. In the modern sense, we call a person original somebody who deviates from that which has come about in the past, something fresh, original research, not the same thing, not the beaten track, but something new as original. The traditional understanding of original is staying bound with the origin, which is technically correct. So the usage of originality as such in the modern usage of things is technically incorrect, because what is called originality is break from the origin. So the tradition itself also has the challenge of responding to the singularity and the plurality of traditions. That there is an immutable archetype of the primordial tradition with a capital T that is common between all of the world religions, all of the world cultures, the normal world, the pre-modern world. And then there are both traditions and the word tradition without contradicting each other. But modernism somehow is premised on the rejection of these principles. So the opposition of tradition and modernism itself, it forms the basis of understanding tradition, because tradition itself wants to slay the modern world. Modernism itself are based on tradition, but present themselves as a break from the tradition, especially in terms of science. All of the findings and presuppositions of modern science, not presupposition, but findings of the modern science, the application of modern science, are often based on traditional sciences, but it presents itself as it's based on a break from traditional science. If there were no number zero, there wouldn't have been computers today. If there were no optics, there would be no Hubble today. And so if there was no algebra and trigonometry, there would be no further advances. And all these things were discovered during Pythagorean times, during the Muslims' times, and during the Egyptians and the Indians and so forth, and the Chinese, and all have contributed toward this whole entire single universe of science that modern science is based on, but presents itself as a break from it. So in the traditional sciences, again, there was a concept of the sacred. The tradition itself in the past being revered and being sacred. Its symbolism is understood through Scientia Sacra. Just like in the world of art, that there is a sacred science, so there are certain parameters that you cannot overstep these boundaries in the quest for your knowledge, in the quest for inquiry. Similarly, in the field of art, there are certain archetypes, there are certain blueprints from the heavens that have to be understood and applied, and those laws that are often revealed in nature, transgression or sidestepping of those laws may not necessarily create harmony. So the connection of truth and beauty from its revealed bosom is something that informs sacred art. And it's the theory of knowledge of tradition, which is at once sacred because of its origin itself is sacred, in terms of its application in the field of arts is also producing sacred art. Now, all of traditional art may not be sacred art, but all of the sacred art is a traditional art, and two may be connected somehow. And I think that I will conclude by saying, in the context of art, that in the Islamic tradition, al-haq, which is the truth, is God, and al-jameel, the most beautiful, is also God. And two are one and the same in Allah, in God. And so this has to be understood as at the basis of those creation of those celestial archetypes that inform the works of art in the modern world. Why is it that there is so much architectural confusion in most urban Muslim cities whose size have gotten unbelievably large, and they are not peaceful and reflective and calm places to live anymore? It has something to do with size, it has also something to do with how the space is used. So space, light, rhythm, motion, all of these things have somehow, in the modern domain, produced things of scale, but not necessarily beauty. And because of the splitting of beauty from truth, and the modern theory of aesthetics, saying that beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder, the complete subjectivization and application of beauty to a single person whose consciousness between the people may vary, and hence no possibility of objectivity of external laws of truth connected with the supreme subject. And so this itself is a crisis of beauty. In modern theory of aesthetics, the ugliness, it may appeal to some, can be as important as beauty. But the beauty itself has laws based upon proportion, and proportion based upon those archetypes that constitute the revealed knowledge that goes back to the traditional sages, the Nastaliq, the origin of that script, which is very beautiful, and one can almost go into a trance by looking at it, gazing at it for a longer period of time. For the quality of time when you step into the mosque of Ibn Talun or Sultan Hassan in Cairo, or in Naqsh Jahan Square in Isfahan, how the time stops is the feng shui of space that is very, very important to understand, and its applications, whether it is in painting or music or literature and so forth, all sorts of arts, leads itself to the harmony and to the faint reflection of the paradisal state that the primordial man was always in. And that's the human tradition. I think my time is up. I will thank you for listening.